Hello, Tom Barnett here again with another story behind the illustration. Here one that started as a very literal interpretation of my text and ended up in almost complete abstraction. That back and forth was not surprising, as this thread presented a rather grand narrative of modern globalization's unfolding, but as I like to think, we landed on the right image in the end. So where does our story begin? This story goes back about 15 years, all the way back to when I first drew this slide and used for several years following. This stretches back to the concepts I presented in my 2009 book, Great Powers. What I was trying to do here was to explain how regional development and integration, the building blocks of modern globalization, sprang originally from the European construct of industrialization, then spread and was replicated by the United States, which in turn both resurrected Europe post-World War II and set in motion and enabled Asia's subsequent rise. I then retold the story with a concrete example: the rise of the automobile, French word, German invention, that jumps to mass production in the United States and subsequently ignites a car culture across wider Asia. Thus, when you're talking about the future of the car industry, it ain't found in already car-heavy Europe, at that point 606 cars per 1,000 people, or America, where there's almost a car for every person, but rather in car-light Asia. I then extended the argument to globalization's future and declared Asia as the likely and logical integrator of note across what I then referred to as globalization's gap regions, or those with narrow or weak connectivity to global supply chains. Say they provide raw materials and not much else. So, which car manufacturing center should we expect to populate growing car fleets and developing economies? Here I suggested it would be, likely, in the end, India, building cars down the road like this then signature cheapo car that they had, Tata's Nano. So you get the idea. Globalization as the gift that keeps on giving, with one being able to track its manufacturing center of gravity by noting where auto production shifts over time. So kind of a big grand narrative with a very concrete example. Since I used that auto industry example in the thread's text, it was only natural that I'd initially reach for some golden age ad for an American car, because the point of that story was how the car industry, once seen as core to the American identity, the American dream, own a car, put it in your garage, how that had shifted over to Asia during the peak globalization period of the 2000s. So that's where our thinking started. It's definitely where my thinking started. And hence, I threw this old ad in as an example of where we might go with the illustration as the Nuttles eventually got around to doing this one. The problem was the whole car industry image was too limiting in its storytelling capacity. Sarah Nuttall's initial conceptual drawing sought to tell that story as sort of a race. Good old American pickup, pulled off over to the side of the road, engine smoking. Japan subsequently sidelined itself. Then in front, China racing ahead, but with India quickly gaining. Not bad once you've read the thread's text, but as an upfront image, it seemed like it was asking the viewer to supply too much of the meaning on their own. It just wasn't transparent enough or evocative enough. Jim Nuttall gave Sarah's concept a go in his first draft, and Jim does a good job of suggesting a sequence of failure here. Problem was, I wanted a sequence of success, not failure. So I ended up proposing some sort of M.C. Escher-like mashup of stairways. You know, the kind where you keep going up and at the same time are simply repeating the rise of the person before you. Sort of the never-ending staircase. That visual concept is actually known as the Penrose Stairs, an impossible object proposed in the 1930s by guess it's not surprising, a Swedish graphic artist, and later made popular by the Brit father-son team Lionel and Roger Penrose. It was Roger who later came across M.C. Escher's drawings, loved them, and then encouraged the illustrator to do his own version of the Penrose Stairs. So that's where that all came from. Most people probably remember this movie version of the Penrose Stairs in Christopher Nolan's 2010 film Inception, which, when you think about it, was a perfect venue for exploring impossible objects, improbable architecture, and so on. And honestly, that's pretty much where I got the idea for this illustration. So that's what Jim generated. The Penrose staircase with 4 seemingly simultaneous but actually sequential rising powers displayed. America up front, seeming to start the process, and then your eye naturally goes clockwise to Japan, then to China, then to India. So capturing the sequence and the repetitiveness of it all, with each power reaching the pinnacle only to find the next one being conquered by its successor, so to speak. The red team here did us a big favor. It discovered that same mistake that we'd done previously on the Indian flag. Thank God, I say, because I did not notice the mistake whatsoever, I'm embarrassed to say. Which gets us to the final book version, which I consider to be a visual triumph in transmitting meaning. And I think it's also beautifully rendered by Jim. And that's the story behind this illustration. Started out very concrete, ended up being very abstract, but I think we got it done. As always, we love it when people buy the book, when they recommend the book, when they praise the book online. I and my Throughline colleagues, we feel very passionate about this work. Please consider subscribing to my Substack newsletter, and see you next time, next illustration.